If you're looking for the easiest tank build in Throne and Liberty, then this is definitely the video for you. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel, HTM here, with my favorite build for tanking in Throne and Liberty lately, the Sword and Shield / Wand combo known as the Templar. Honestly, tanking does not get any easier than this, thanks to the massive amounts of self-healing this build has access to, plus it's fantastic for group content due to the debuffs and buffs our skills can provide. So if you're looking for the easiest build by far to quickly conquer those co-op dungeons, then I definitely recommend you check it out, and let's jump right in. So let's start with the stats and character sheet, checking out the stat points. You want to definitely invest first into the strength stat, as much points as you can as possible, up to 30 from just your raw stats. And then you also want to start looking for gear pieces, which have the strength stat as well. And that's because this is basically, the physical or the survival stat in Throne and Liberty. This does things like improve your max health, your health regeneration, and you can see the different achievement effects, or basically the milestones. I still need to get up to 70 strength because I want that final bonus to melee and range defense. But you can see you also get a ton of health from those milestones. You get extra damage reduction. So this makes sense as the primary stat for basically any tank setup in the game. Now, as far as your secondary stat that I would recommend, definitely Wisdom here, because it's going to increase the size of your mana pool and also help a little bit with cooldown speed and mana regeneration. So you'll be able to cast your abilities more often before you run out of resources. And honestly, with just a small investment, like about 30 points, you could probably do less even. You'll be fine as far as resources go on this build, because we have other ways of sustaining as well. And then any other points that you have left over, feel free to invest those into dexterity or perception as you see fit. So moving on to the gear next, obviously this is a sword and a wand combo build. Now, as you're starting out, any sword and wand that you pick up is going to be totally fine. As you hit level 50 though, there are certain things that you'll want to start looking for, especially with bonuses and traits. Max health is going to be one of the best stats to look for, and Karnak's Netherblade does have a nice max stat line on it. You can see I'm getting 1500 or so max health, and it's not even fully upgraded yet. It also comes with a very significant strength bonus, which again, that's going to help a lot with your survivability stats. This comes from a level 50 dungeon, but it's honestly not that difficult. It's called Death's Abyss, and you can see here is the Karnak's Netherblade as one of the rewards. So I definitely recommend you farm this, get it as soon as possible, especially once you hit level 50 for the extra strength and the max health. Now the wand is really up to you. One of the early ones that you can get, Tome of Proximate Remedy, is nice for the strength bonus. The way this works in Throne and Liberty, it's basically like a stat stick. You're not going to, main hand the wand. That doesn't really make sense on this particular build, but you do get the extra strength here on your build, which is really nice. Another one that's easy to get early on is called the Wand of Skyward Blessing. You can get this from open world dungeon contracts. This gives you perception instead of strength, but it does give you a nice bonus to mana cost efficiency, which obviously that's going to help a lot with your sustain on the build as well. So those are just some early options that you can look into picking up for your build in terms of your weapons. Now, in terms of your gear and your armor, you're going to want things that have the most resistances possible, melee defense and range defense. In terms of stat lines, just like the weapons, most armor pieces can have max health, and so that's going to be another stat that you're going to want to look for on armor pieces. And then some type of defensive stat, either evasion or endurance. Now this epic armor of the resistance, this is something you can actually get from the main story quest as you complete that. I believe it's one of the final rewards that you get. So it's definitely worth doing the main story for those armor of the resistance pieces. You'll also get like gloves and boots and legs, and the whole set is really fine as a starter tanking set. From there, I mentioned the Gloomguard set in one of my other videos. This also comes from that level 50 dungeon where you get the Netherblade. This is a cool set because you get some extra bonus stats. Like you can see the max strength on the boots, on the gloves, for example. That's going to help you max out that strength stat early on. The Ancient Tapestry Mantle is pretty nice for the defensive stats you get here, especially the evasion, along with the max health trait. And for accessories, just again, go for those defensive stats. Magic defense, melee defense, the Guardian Torque is nice. Kunzite Bangle, Platinum Skullband, even this green, Belt of Vigor. Once you actually max these out in level, the stats that you can get are pretty good. So just prioritize those stats that we talked about, and you really should have no trouble at all. All right, let's jump into skills next, starting with our defensive skill on this build. Pretty obvious, it's going to be Shield Survival from the One Hand and Shield skill line. This just gives you a really good defensive option, especially when facing off against multiple targets. Basically, when you block a Fury attack, you're going to get a lot of health back. So if you block multiple attacks, you could potentially be healed back to full. So it's a really good survival skill in general. Great for soloing, great for tank and group content. So I definitely recommend you start there. Now, in terms of active abilities, I have these set up on controller. So that's why I have the different little groupings here and the way that makes sense. So in this first set, we have sort of most of the taunting or utility skills that I'm going to need as a tank, starting off with Provoking Roar. Now, this is kind of like almost like an AoE taunt in the sense. The Provoke debuff is going to force enemies to attack you. The radius is kind of small, 3 meters, so you do need to sort of practice with how you use it. Make sure you're close enough to monsters so they'll actually notice you when you use this skill, because it does have a pretty long cooldown, over 20 seconds. But then we also have Shield Throw with the specialization here that increases aggro. So this sort of functions as a taunt ability as well. Nice thing about this is that you can throw it straight in front of you, and so you can actually aggro multiple enemies using this skill as well. We also have Strategic Rush. This is not essentially a taunt. It more functions as like a gap closer, but also as a stun. Especially if you collide with targets against a wall, you're going to stun them for 2 seconds. So this is a nice option for mobility as well as interrupting casters, which is really useful to have. And we've got our Chain Pull or Chain Hook. Keep in mind, this doesn't work on most boss type enemies. It's going to pull you to the boss instead. But a lot of people miss that this is also a taunt. You can see on the tooltip here, it generates the maximum aggro possible against monsters. Now, it does have a very long cooldown as well, but you can use this sort of as an emergency taunt to generate that maximum aggro level possible. Moving on to our next set of skills. These are a little bit more offensive focused and for debuffs. So Piercing Strike, let me talk about this. This is actually the morph of Shield Strike, and I do like this because it is AoE. It changes the skill from single target to it's like a 60-degree cone in front of you. So you can hit multiple targets with this, and with the specialization, it's also going to increase their aggro against you. So with the specialization, this is almost like an AoE taunt type of skill as well. And it also has a very short cooldown, less than 6 seconds on this build. So this really functions as like your main taunt that you're going to have, available all the time. But finishing out with our offensive sword skills, we have Witty Strike. This does a little bit of damage, but it's also more of a sustained skill because it's going to recover mana based on the amount of targets that you hit. Plus with specialization, it can recover stamina as well. So this thing is huge. Remember, it's based on targets hit. So if you get a group of enemies, try to get them all within that 120 degrees to get the maximum benefit out of this. Then we got Annihilating Slash. This is another AoE skill. Got this set up to apply movement speed debuff. So this is kind of nice to snare enemies, group them together a little bit easier. And then our final sword ability is one that I really like. This is more of a group buff. I believe the base name for the skill is like Stalwart Bastion, something like that. And it's a defensive skill, but once you reach specialization, you can actually turn it into an offensive skill. So this is boosting my party skill damage by 79, and it's not even, epic quality yet. This is going to continue to scale up. So this is great for phases where you need to push a boss, get their health down as quickly as possible, increase your party's damage. That's where I'm going to reserve this skill. So you can see the majority of the skills that we have, about 8 of those, are going to be sword skills. But let's shift over to the wand skills next. These are mostly healing, but we do have one sort of debuff skill here, which is really good. It's called Time for Punishment. The skill is right here in the wand skill tree, and this debuffs the target's skill damage resistance by quite a bit. And again, I only have this at rare quality. It's not epic yet, so that's going to continue to improve. With specialization, you can make this skill last even longer, and combined with passives, you have almost a 100% uptime with this skill. So it's really good for bosses to debuff their skill resistance with a very high uptime. And then we've got our 3 heals, so let me talk about those next. In terms of healing yourself, and like an emergency heal, we have Swift Healing. Now you can cast this up to 3 times in a row, and you can buff it quite a bit with specialization, where you'll get more healing and mana recovery from it. So this heal is really insane. I do recommend you level this up as much as possible because the scaling is nice as well. You're going to get over 500% healing when you fully max this out. The quick cooldown, 10 seconds, low mana cost. This thing is just insane. So this is going to be your primary survival tool for yourself. If you take a big burst of damage and your healer isn't able to get you up as quickly, this is your main self-healing tool. Now, in terms of group healing, and what's really useful to have on this build is Fountain of Life. This is an AoE heal over time, so it places the fountain on the ground. We have some area bonuses. The radius is increased with specialization. This is going to be great healing for you and your group, especially those melee DPS. With this skill active, your healer won't need to touch any of those players at all. You'll be fully healed thanks to this skill. And then just an emergency group heal that I really like is called Clay's Salvation. It does have a cast time, keep that in mind, so you can be interrupted. But the scaling is really good. I haven't even really leveled this up that much yet. And the cooldown is not bad. So you can keep this on hand again for emergencies, like a big wave of damage, maybe from a boss. You can cast this right away and then get your party back to full health. But those are the active abilities. If you need any help with those, I will have all of these listed in the written guide. Link for that is going to be down below. But let's talk about the passives next and how they interact with this build. So starting with the sword passives, skillful evasion is going to be really nice to increase your evasion. It's based on proximity to target, and you get some additional evasion against provoked targets. So that's another nice synergy with this build and your AoE taunt. Then we have Resilient Mind. This just gives you a little bit of extra mana sustain. That's why I said you don't really need a lot of sustain on this build, because we're getting a lot through passives and through specialization. Resilient Mind is one of those. We have Impenetrable, which increases your defense based on the number of targets within range. So the more targets are there, the more defense you have, all the way up to 700, which is really nice. And we have Aegis Shield, which increases our shield damage reduction. But those are going to be the 4 passives that I recommend for sword. And then we do have 4 passives for wand as well. Now, Vampiric Contract is kind of optional. This is really nice for boss fights where you might be on your own a little bit more. It's going to restore your allies' health when they're in range, but if there's no allies within range, it's going to restore your health instead. And that's based on the damage that you deal. So even your basic attacks will give you some health back. But combined with that, we have Wraith's Beckon. And this is what I talked about with the curse duration. For skills like Time for Punishment, you can get an extra 2 to 3 seconds on those skills to really give you a high uptime on those curses. We have Devotion and Emptiness. This is just a bonus to healing during the day, plus skill cooldowns, which is really good. The nighttime bonus isn't really as helpful, though. And then finally, Noble Revival. This is just a direct boost to healing. This is based on your max mana. So we'll get, probably 12% bonus healing on this build based on our mana pool, which is still really good. Now, let's talk about the specialization, which is pretty basic if you're focused on tanking. I do recommend for the sword mastery that you specialize into the boss skill tree here. This one is honestly really good. So you've got the boss endurance, got things like max health, stun resistance. You've got boss damage reduction, you've got mana cost efficiency, which is really nice. And you could probably stop there because the rest of these bonuses are offensive. So if you're at this point, feel free to specialize into some of these other trees as well. Then in terms of the wand weapon mastery, I went with the recovery tree in this case. I think this is just like a good mix of defensive and healing bonuses. So for example, you'll get bonus to melee defensive stats. You'll get improved evasion, improved cooldown speed, healing increased by 8%, buff duration increase. So yeah, this is where I recommend you start in the wand weapon mastery. But let's go ahead and talk about specialization next. And again, if you want to see all of this broken down in the written guide, check out the link below where I'll have all of the skills, passives, and the specialization broken down for each skill. But starting with the sword specialization, we talked about morphing shield strike into piercing strike. Again, that's going to make it more of like an AoE taunt because we changed it to an AoE cone with the piercing strike morph. And then we also have the aggro increased bonus. A strategic rush, I don't really have anything here. I don't think it's quite worth it for a tank build. But then chain hook, we do have a buff to the distance, which is helpful. Provoking roar, I have the boost to duration. It's almost 2 seconds against monsters, which is helpful. And then the cooldown reduction is helpful as well. Shield throw, remember to pick up the aggro increased specialization here. Otherwise, it's not really a taunt or it's not as useful. Great Fury, this is that morph which changes it to skill damage boost away from a damage reduction skill. So that's what I recommend there. Annihilating Slash, we've got the movement speed slowed, and then we also have radius increase. Witty Strike, really helpful that you take both of these. The stamina recovery bonus here especially is useful. Remember, you're going to lose a lot of stamina when you block while tanking. So this is an instant, basically back to full stamina, especially if you're facing off against multiple enemies. And then consecutive use, so you can use it twice. So you'll basically, double your stamina and magicka recovery with this skill. But that's what I recommend for sword specialization. Then moving on to the wand specialization. We talked about swift healing, how powerful this skill can be. It's really not as good until you do the specialization. You can see you're going to dump a lot of points here. Healing transfers gives you a bonus heal. Then you have consecutive use. That's going to give you up to 3 casts in a row. And then mana recovery. It's probably not necessary. If you want to save 5 points there, you could. But Clay's Salvation, I definitely recommend you increase the radius here. That's really good for only 3 points. Time for Punishment, you want to increase the duration. And then Fountain of Life, I definitely recommend you put in all 3 specializations here. That's mana recovery, radius increased, and then improved effect duration. All right, so how do you play this build? Well, one of your first priorities is going to be maintaining that debuff on enemies, Time for Punishment, for example, plus the debuff from Piercing Strike. From there, it's really just rotating taunts with skills like Chain Hook, Shield Throw. Remember, Provoking Roar has one of the longer cooldowns, and you can save that for when you have multiple enemies appearing in the fight. Then you can throw in those damage skills when you have time, Witty Strike, Annihilating Strike. But another priority is going to be interrupting, especially interrupting wipe mechanics. For example, this mini-boss has an AoE attack that does massive damage when he calls out. You want to save your shield rush for that moment and then rush into him, either interrupting him or stunning him based on your positioning. If you know a boss has a mechanic like that, you'll want to save your rush ability for that moment. But you can see this boss was pretty easy, so I didn't need to do a lot of healing. Yeah, you can throw on Fountain of Life when you're starting to take damage. That's a nice skill to use as well. But basically the same concepts apply to any type of main dungeon boss also. This is where you want to make use of that Great Fury group buff to increase your team's skill damage. Save that for when you need the most damage. But also save your Swift Healing and your Clay's Salvation for those moments where maybe you get separated from the group, so you're going to need to spam that quick healing on yourself. And then throw on Clay's Salvation anytime you might have like a boss mechanic that's damaging the entire group. You can push that heal out really quick to help out your healer. But that's really it for this one. Like I said, it's a super simple build. Great for co-op dungeons and especially pickup groups which are less organized. You know, maybe you have a healer who's new at the game and you need to support the group with your own healing and off healing. This is the perfect build to do that. Plus, being a tank, it's really easy to get queued into groups as well because people are always looking for a good tank. So hopefully you found this build helpful. If you did, do me a favor, crush that like button so YouTube knows to share this video with others. It is much appreciated. As always, don't forget there's a written guide down in the description and the pinned comment below. Over there on the website, hacktheminotaur.com, I'll have everything you need to know to make this build work, including the skills, passives, weapon mastery, specialization, everything else is there. So check that out. And as always, thanks for watching. Hope you're doing well. Stay safe out there, and I will see you around in the next video.